Hi there, and welcome to the latest in conversation with Bravura. This time we have Nicola Morgan from Marks and Spencer's. Hi there, Nicola. Would you like to just give us a little introduction to yourself and a bit of your background?
Yeah, thanks, John, and thank you to John as well for inviting me along today. So as I say, I'm Nicola Morgan. I joined Marks and Spencer as the head of pensions on the corporate side back in January this year. Joined at quite an exciting time during when we were doing a total reward review. So my role is a bit broader than just pensions. I also get involved in the broader reward strategy. Prior to that, I was at Fujitsu and I was secretary to the trustee and headed up the in-house pensions operations there for 3 years. And prior to that, I've been at a number of FTSE 100 companies on either the corporate or the trustee side, including Centric, BG Group prior to their acquisition by Shell, where I also had responsibility for international benefits and pensions. So out of my nearly 31-year career in pensions and benefits, broadly half of my career at the start was in sort of pensions administration and actuarial consultancy, and for the latter part of my career I've been in-house corporates in various roles.
Thank you, Nicola. And we've got Jon May here as well from Bravura. Hi, John.
Hello there again. Yeah, so I've been on a couple of these before. Just for your knowledge, Nicola, my name's Jon May and I work here in business development at Bravura. So my role is to attract new members to the Bravura family over time. And we're doing this series about workplace pensions or workplace savings more generally, I would say, in the UK, which our premise, our hypothesis is that it will be an area of material change in the coming years. And we want to be part of that change. We think we can be.
Great,
yeah,
thanks, John.
Thanks, John. And I'm Jonathan Hawkins, and I am one of the principal consultants at Bravura, and my particular responsibilities around the propositions about workplace savings and what technology and innovation Bravura can bring to that space. And so, Nicola, you're talking about the first half of your career being in pensions administration, actuarial. That's where we originally met.
Yeah, absolutely.
A few years ago. Back in the day. So interestingly, I think Nicola has really gone into the corporate side of pensions, and I've gone into the technological side of pensions, and we often have quite interesting conversations, although our other halves don't think they're quite so interesting as we do, about the whole pensions, savings and workplace world, and we can get quite opinionated at times, I think is fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, very true.
Let's go.
Good idea.
Oh, excellent.
Great.
So before we get into the specifics of managing pensions for a big corporation, what are your general thoughts on the state of pensions and workplace savings generally across the board in the UK? How do you see it, the state of the nation as far as pensions and savings is at the moment?
Well, first of all, I don't like the word pensions, so I'll get that out there. I think it's quite disengaging for quite a large demographic. Obviously at Marks and Spencer's, so we are currently running it about 56,000 colleagues in UK and Ireland. We'll shortly be recruiting another 15,000 for short-term peak, because we start peak in October. Mm-hmm. And that's across our sort of retail distribution and support centre colleagues. So we do have to think about how our financial wellbeing proposition resonates with quite a diverse bunches of people. So again, I don't think pensions really, apart from the guys that have probably been around a long time, have what I call the bedrock DB pension savings, would be particularly engaged if you started talking to them about pensions. You're bringing in a graduate in, you go, yeah, we've got this great pension scheme, and they're like, well, that's 50 years away, I'm not, or 40, 50 years away, I'm not interested. What where's the cash? And I think the best way, and it goes back a while, it just always stuck with me, the best way somebody described it to me, and it was actually when I was at BAE, where I was for 7 years, and used to go out on the road quite a bit doing like presentations to employees, was and it was when auto enrollment was kicking off, was actually it's deferred pay. So if you're not in the pension scheme, you're effectively giving up a chunk of money that your employer would be giving you. So you're not getting it now, but it's there for you to access when you're no longer working, or to supplement, you know, whatever form of the state pension might be. So I do think there is for me, I think the challenge is around not necessarily around the vehicles that we have to deliver it. So, you know, the pension arrangements, workplace savings generally, because we're actually looking from next year to open up into offering workplace sort of ISA savings, so payroll deduction savings, wider savings. We obviously have share plans and stuff. So we have a multitude of ways that our colleagues can save for either short-term or longer-term retirement savings. It's how we communicate that and how we engage. And I think for me, it is a combination of finding ways to get those messages across and to the right people, but also making it easy for them to engage. And I think that's where the technology piece comes in massively now. I think we're not in the realms anymore of where we go, well, not, you know, the older demographic doesn't have, you know, access to computers, or people that work in factories don't have access to computers. Most people have got access to a smartphone or a tablet these days, right? So, and they're engaged with apps to do their banking. That's in my head, that's the mindset we need to be thinking of, is like we make it easy, accessible, at your fingertips. That's the way I think we will drive engagement.
That's really interesting, because I you know, it won't surprise you to know that I hate the word pensions as well, because I think most people who are saving at the moment don't have the luxury of what our parents' generations had, of having those defined benefit pensions, because they were a pension. We have retirement savings or deferred pay. I quite like that deferred pay piece. And I think there's a huge education piece, as you say, to do with the wider populace. How do you think society as a whole, or pension providers and the industry as a whole, should be working towards better communication?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously auto enrollment, I mean, we're almost 10 years on, which is quite a scary thought now from auto enrollment. I don't think it's the, you know, all of the solution. I think it probably brought it onto people's radars because all of a sudden they were having money deducted out of their salary, and obviously it sort of forced employers to re-engage on the pension side. But for me, in some respects, it almost felt like it was it's compliance rather than a want and a desire to do the right thing by your colleagues or your employees. So yeah, I do think that we, you know, that's a good starting point. And obviously there was a lot of engagement and lots of press and that at the time. I generally don't think that, I think pensions have had a bad press. So you've had all the pension transfer scandals. We're now in the, you know, the realms of, you know, pension scams. I think people are quite understandably nervous, particularly during COVID and now post-COVID, about, you know, their security of their finances. But I also think it's now a point that we can re-engage and go, look, you've gone through a period where people have had reductions in income, for example, being on furlough, and actually having access to short-term savings, which could have been, like I say, assisted, payroll assisted arrangements via your employer, as well as your pension. I see it as much more of a holistic package. So yeah, I think that's where we need to be thinking, and not thinking of the P word in segregated terms and not stand alone, which is why my remit now, you know, where I am now at M&S is a broader financial wellbeing remit, and I also sit as part of the wellbeing team. So that's as a sort of side, which I think is really important, because it's understanding. You need to really get under the bonnet of what's going to land with that particular demographic and that particular company. It's not one size fits all by any stretch.
So thinking about that, I really like what you're saying about the holistic piece of that savings agenda from an employer perspective.
Yeah.
How is the UK pensions and savings industry helping you in that regard? And is there the innovation there that you want to see as an innovative employer in that space? Are you getting what you need through that transformation?
I think we've gone back a bit to the governance burden, and the compliance can be barriers to, you know, being able to be more sort of fleet of foot and react as quickly as you sometimes need to sort of intervention points, for example. You know, we saw it again off the back of COVID. All of a sudden, you know, DWP were like, right, we've got all this stuff on our shelf that's been sat there for 2 years that we need to dust off, and out comes rafts of, you know, consultations and draft regulations, which you've got to get your head round. And you know, and that's not just, again, in the sort of retirement savings pension space. You know, for example, I think lifetime ISAs was a massively missed opportunity. I still can't get my head around why they put the age 40 cap on it.
Complex,
No.
isn't it?
Yeah, it felt, you know, why was that? I do understand it's from a cost constraint perspective from Treasury and stuff. So you've got that, also that sort of contention between Treasury wanting tax revenue and the DWP wanting to do effectively, you know, the welfare piece on it. But as we found with pension freedoms, that was fundamentally a Treasury decision that the DWP hadn't really been involved in. And actually, as it transpires, you know, I think it was a good thing, although, you know, because it did give people the ability to access their retirement savings in different ways. But equally, the cynic in me says, you know, it was a bit, you know, we can get, if people take cash, we can get tax, much upfront tax, because they're taking it as a lump sum rather than as income. So I think there is some sort of, you know, we've got some things around like the legislation and stuff, which makes it quite clunky to be able to do a really good job. You know, and creates a lot of you know, unnecessary work and fees and things, which I'm not really sure, well, in fact I know that the end recipient or consumer or pension scheme member or colleague actually sees the benefit of, because as long as, you know, as long as they sort of go, right, it's with my employer, whether I'm saving through a short-term savings vehicle, through a share save plan, or through my retirement savings, you know, I'm doing that through my employer, and I'm sort of comfortable with that. But I don't necessarily see that there is apart from auto enrollment, and again, what's going to happen with that? You know, we all thought it would go up like the Australian model, and, you know, incrementally up to a decent level of pension savings. I don't know when that's going to change in the post-COVID environment, you know, from an affordability perspective. So yeah, I don't necessarily think there is that support to enable, as an enabler, really, for what people want to achieve or need.
So picking up on, John.
Go on, do you mind if because I picked up on a couple of things. The first thing is your use of language, you know, savings and benefits instead of pension, your use of colleagues instead of members. That's so cool and different from what we're used to on some of these discussions, frankly. But then you've brought in the Australian model there, which is something I wanted to just pick up a little bit, because your history is very around quite large employers, I would say, by the sounds of it generally. And
yeah, predominantly. I mean, I think probably in recent times, the smallest one I've worked for was BG Group, which is obviously an oil and gas company that was taken over by Shell back in 2016. And that was 5,000 colleagues, but globally. So, you know, quite a broad reach. So yeah, it generally has been on the larger side. I haven't really worked for any what I'd call the real SME, you know, traditional SME size employer. But obviously, rewinding back to days of working in consultancy practice and administration, you know, you'd be dealing with employers of all sizes, you know, with different challenges, which I think it's always interesting, you know, if you can have, it's that 80-20 rule for me, you know, if you're going in there with a broad framework of how you want to approach something, of what good looks like, in the knowledge that you're going to have to refine it and tweak it to make it fit, really. So that's always how I approach it when I start a new job. You know, go with that broad, you know, require, you know, what you feel is the right thing to do and what's achievable. But then, you know, actually take the time to listen and reflect on what the, you know, the business strategy is, what the different, as I said earlier, the different demographics, the different wants and needs, what people are pushing for. You know, interestingly, as I say, when we did our sort of total reward survey, unsurprisingly, our biggest, two of the biggest things that came out were pension. Interestingly, the pension scheme, but I think that's probably from the older demographic that value their old deferred DB pot. Also, obviously, our colleague discount.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
So that's cash now.
If we think of if we do think of other size employers, though, smaller employers, and I'm intrigued in the future of work really as well, and the impact that will have on the pension system as you see it. And you mentioned the Australian. The reason I pull in those two things is because obviously you've got much more of a sort of member consumer centric model in Australia, here where we're much more employer centric. And I often see things, you know, small pots, and you just wonder, has our model created those problems? And there are
sure.
I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so that was the thing. So I think with the Australian model, there was quite a clear strategy, you know, there's a clear strategy there from the Australian government. It's like, we're going to do it incrementally, but we want to get to a point where, you know, we have, you know, a good, strong, you know, sort of like the sort of employer, so the sort of state benefit, but then you've got the pillar 1 and then the pillar 2 supporting it under their under the superannuation guarantee legislation, their version of AE. But then, like you say, supplemented with some really strong communications about the importance of individual savings. I don't think that's where we are. I think, for me, with auto enrolment in the UK, again, it comes back to that compliance. It was something that was a good thing because it got, you know, people that were saving, but equally, not everyone's in because you've got low paid people. So with the way it's carved up, it doesn't capture everybody, particularly when it was at the lower rates. You know, you've got these people going, well, I'm in a pension scheme, so that's great. So when I retire, I'm going to have, you know, oodles of money. And going back to John's point is around, well, I'm going to be able to have the same standard of living and the holidays and, you know, pay my mortgage off like my mum and dad did. That's not going to be the case. And there's a bit of a fear for me that people will sort of, you know, walk into it, sort of, you know, walk into the days when they're not working. Because I don't think also retirement as a concept is what it is. You know, again, it's not going to be the stopping work at 60. I think people might stop their main job, but still work to supplement their income and, you know, flexibly draw on their retirement savings to supplement their income. I think we're just sort of walking into it, you know, without thinking and just assuming we're at a pivotal point of change. I think, you know, that the old, you know, that sort of the generational change. I'm a good example. You know, I'm nearly 2 years off 50, as I will be on Friday. So the concept of, you know, when I will think about sort of, you know, working sort of shorter hours and stuff in 10 years, 15 years from that is starting to come onto the horizon. But I've only got one job, which is obviously from years and years ago, where I've got a quite small DB pension. So all of my savings is DC. So we're only sort of at that tipping point of 10 years time, when we're going to have people that have predominantly got either workplace or individual savings to see them through retire. And as I say, you know, the ideal situation is a balance of those longer term savings and short term, so that, you know, you can ride the, you know, short term expenditure requirements and stuff, or emergency funds that you might need to access, you know, without sort of detrimentally damaging the longer term savings piece. So anything that we can do to just make that journey more joined up and more accessible, you know, and start that education really early on, because I say it's really hard to engage, like I say, a graduate and stuff like that. But actually, if you can get them started on that journey with the short, medium term savings piece in terms of saving for a house purchase, for example, and just engendering that philosophy, just general savings philosophy, that's half the battle. And I just don't think we have any sort of national impetus or anything driving that everyone's focused on. It all just feels like, so very employer centric. Depends how good your employer is, depends how, you know, their appetite for supporting this, how much money they've got. You know, we haven't got money sloshing around like we used to in the past. Yeah, it's there is a gap. Absolutely, I think I agree.
So you were talking a little bit about regulations coming in. We spoke a bit about auto enrollment. So we've got bits of legislation that have been, as you put it earlier, dusted off and going through Parliament. So there's a couple of those that spring to mind, particularly around the employer perspective and thinking from a saver's perspective. So first one being pensions dashboards. So thinking of your employees and your colleagues, how do you think the pensions dashboard will affect their thoughts and decisions around pension savings?
It's going to be an interesting one, because I think, again, a bit like auto enrollment, it's one of these things that conceptually I think is a fantastic idea. The actual implementation of delivery, I still is a bit of a worry bead for me, if I'm honest. I think there's possibly been some missed opportunity around having one centralized place, and I know data is going to be a challenge. But equally, I know that, you know, it is probably good that people have got choice. So now we fast forward and we're in a different world. I think from a DC savings perspective, I think having the ability to basically be able to see that, and that's really simple to explain. So it comes back to that point around, I can see all my pots and my pots all add up to this. And if people are thinking around, you know, or I might want to transfer, I can see where I've got to go. So from that perspective, having it all in one place and not having to trog around and phone up this person and get a quote, or if they haven't got online, I think, again, and I know it will work its way through, but having how you show DB pensions on there and how people see that, because, you know, obviously if it's a capital value, that will change. And how, I think that, again, simplicity is the key, right? So it's all about, people just want to go into one place and see it. And if there's too many links off and go here and do that, and they'll just go, I can't be bothered. Because as I say, everyone's used to going on your banking app, or, you know, booking your train ticket and you go on here and you go there and it's done, or you see it on one screen. So I do think, you know, my initial thoughts were right, okay, maybe one place would have been the right place. But actually now I think, you know, there are some really good opportunities out there for people to create really good dashboards. But with that huge focus on that consumer journey, that where just make it, all I would say is just make it simple, because even the most financially literate of people, and you know, I'd like to count myself as that, don't have the time or the will or the want to do it all the time. So the more engaging and easy you can make it, the better. Absolutely.
Do you foresee that as an employer, your HR teams and your reward and benefits teams are likely to get some kind of impact from dashboards?
I think it will make conversations or a better understanding of what the total. So one of the things we struggle with, and it's been a struggle wherever I've worked, is people understanding the total value of their package. So, you know, day-to-day colleague, they pay their whatever in every month. Employer pays their bit in. Once a year, they get a statement. If they can be bothered at the moment to download the app, they might do. You know, you'll get the odd one that's more engaged and go in and check it and, you know, do switches and stuff like that. But, you know, that's in the, you know, 1 to 5%. If we as an employer, and like you say, in terms of, and it starts right through from recruitment, you know, you just say the total value of your package. So you're looking at in a total reward context. If people can go in and see that the value of their pot has built up, and then when they're looking back on dashboards as well, they can actually also make informed decisions around when they might want to retire, or stop working or reduce their hours, you know, and that will help HR, for example, to have more informed conversations with people around managing workforce planning, because somebody might not know that they can afford to scale down their hours. So yeah, I think that it will help, because it's a tool in the toolbox, isn't it? It's a facilitator to actually for those conversations and somewhere for people to go to get additional information.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there. I hadn't considered that from a workforce and retirement planning perspective from that employer side. So is that,
yeah,
that I think that's a really interesting point, and I think from my perspective, I can see dashboards having quite a lot of intended and unintended consequences. And I think these are the conversations I'm really interested to have. So it's a really good point you've picked up there.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, sorry, John. I was just going to add to that. It's just that I think it always came back to me when you said from the workforce planning piece, and it's just a bit of anecdotal evidence, really, more than anything. Is like, you know, for example, when I worked at Centric, if you've got a 66-year-old British gas engineer who doesn't understand what he can, you know, what retirement income he's going to have, you know, as a good employer, you should be having conversations with him and be able to, you know, engage him to understand it, because, you know, from a health and safety perspective, you don't want him lugging around a boiler. So there is something around that, around, you know, HR, as you say, really engaging with people, and like I say, the more tools that we have to enable those good conversations, the better.
That's probably an angle of engagement, the word, that is misunderstood or just not understood at all, because we have a lot of debates, don't we, in pensions about, is engagement a good thing or a bad thing? Shouldn't you just leave savings alone? But actually it depends what sector you're in, doesn't it? What your colleagues are doing and their lifestyle. Where do you stand on the whole engagement debate generally, Nicola?
I think I just touched on it then. It's like having, you know, we should enable people to be able to go and find the information easily. That's our job. Our job is, you know, so we can provide a pension scheme, and we can provide access to workplace savings through, you know, our workplace ISAs, and we can provide share save and all of that good stuff, and go, right, that's it. We've ticked, you know, we've ticked the box. We've done our bit as a good employer. What's the point of having them if people don't understand them, aren't using them? You know, it's almost like I say, you've ticked that compliance box and go, great, okay, move on. That's a bit of admin. If you're not actually then getting the positive colleague experience, and it actually supports their financial well-being, which is really important, because, you know, another point that we're finding, you know, finances is a huge source of stress, and it can cause workplace absences. So if we're not sort of talking to people and sort of trying to break down some of those taboos around, it's okay to talk about it, and here's where you can go for more information. And it even comes down to the point of when you're signposting things like EAP. So when you look at it in those broad terms, you have all of these enablers here to be picked up at the point. So as I say, it can be a particular, life event or an intervention point where you can be assisting a colleague to go to the right place. So that could be, you could even be not even necessary in savings. It can be around, sort of debt counselling or debt management. So I think as a good employee, you do have a responsibility to your colleagues or your workforce to, provide them with that support. And when you come back to the engagement, I think it's, just going out there, having some really open, we had a healthy lifestyles week, for example, a healthy finances week back in July. And we talked about all of these things, and we signposted some of the charitable partners that we have that can help people that are sort of with grants for school, for school and schoolwear and things like that if they're in financial difficulties. So I think it's, you have to have broadly think about every potential circumstance somebody could be in and give them the right guidance without overloading them. So it's it is that balance of, so we have a wellbeing hub where people can go and find different things, acknowledging that, like I say, not everyone's circumstances are the same. So it's very much, for me, part of that central wellbeing strategy as an employer.
So there's quite a lot of technology then you're applying within Marks and Spencer to leverage that between looking at your savings for retirement, other types of workplace savings, your EAP service, your money, financial literacy and understanding pieces.
Yeah.
How do your employees engage with those, and what are the best ways you found to get your employees interested?
So it's quite traditional, as you can imagine. So 45,000 of our colleagues are either store based or your distribution based, if not more, 50,000. Line manager engagement, and educating line managers and, as you say, HR to know where to go to have those conversations and to signpost people to. So we're not expecting people to be experts in it, but just if, as a line manager, one of your team is experiencing something, they've got questions about their pension, or they've got questions about, financial difficulties. It's having that awareness and knowledge to be able to signpost them to the right place. So you're not expected to be a counsellor or advisor. So we do heavily invest time and communications and think to upskill our line managers and our HR colleagues to be advocates for that. But overlaying that, we are we have a really good bunch of networks within M&S. So we have buddy networks, but we're also looking to launch a specific wellbeing network, which would obviously encompass financial wellbeing. So we'll have the name is up for debate at the moment, what they'll be called. But effectively, it will be colleagues that are, have expressed an interest. They'll either be based in store or based in distribution centre or based in support centres, who will be advocates for wellbeing and be seen as a central touch point and that sort of person that can help signpost people to the right place, so that people aren't trawling through, as you say, pages and pages. And this comes back to having this one central hub where everything in terms of our, like you say, the financial literacy and financial wellbeing piece will sit, the EAP will sit, and signposts to some of the additional health benefits we'll provide. So like a sort of, tripartite hub. So yes, that sort of part of it. I don't think, like I say, technology is completely the solution by any means. You are going to have to probably, and depends on the organisation, right? So because we do have people that are in store, so that the line manager briefings that we have in stores every morning, they get a bit of paper that they read out. And so if we're doing anything like we did Healthy Finances Week, they promote that. And we still go back, now we're out of COVID, we can do traditional things around posters. And, there's a real appetite to, almost it's like a blank sheet of paper. So if we, again, post-COVID, wanted people in support centres talking about some of these things, or in stores and things, talking about things, there's a real appetite and a want and a desire to do it. And I think that's another point. Our CEO is massively engaged in this, and it feels like it's a really important part of the colleague proposition, and to support. We talk about the M&S family. And it really is. And I'm not saying that as a promotion for M&S, but it really is, and it's huge, but it feels quite small. So yeah, I think it really does depend on how much the employer wants to overlay that. So I don't think you can just, like you say, introduce an app and they go, there you go. It's around that. How do you introduce that? How do you keep that momentum up? Bringing new things and new ideas and keeping it fresh as well. So, I think going back, we've always been, quite fond of like, oh, that's that new shiny new thing, so we'll do that, and that's great, and that solves that problem, and then we never do anything with it for 3 years, and then wonder why we've only got 5% people that have even looked at it.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that you build your comms and your point engagement plan around that. It's just not delivering it, it's around partnering with the technology provider, for example, and keeping it fresh, keeping it live, understanding what's on the technology roadmap, what's coming next, because that's the other thing, isn't it? We've seen it again mentioned in banking apps, and I'm going on about it, but it's a good example how much they evolve and have evolved from what they originally looked like. So yeah, I think it is that keeping it sort of something that people are interested in, because people like new shiny things. So let's try and keep it new and shiny and interesting, really.
I agree. I think the keeping it in people's minds, and that sort of drip, drip, drip. I think engagement to me is being brilliant when somebody needs you. It's not everybody engaging all the time. It's all about the individual being able to get what they want when they need it, and get it quickly and understand it. And I think that's a sort of a real thing. I think with the millennials that are coming through now is having that real short, quick burst of information, and then off onto something else. I know I am. If I have to look too hard at something, I've lost interest. Exactly.
Yeah, it's that point. It's that point in time, isn't it? Absolutely. So whether we want it or not, we live in a technological world, and people can say things like social media and stuff like that. It's here to stay. Let's embrace it and make use of it, and use all the sort of channels at our disposal to actually, so I say, allow that point in time. So as I say, we're really, really conscious, and we might have lots and lots of things to communicate, but again, as a company, we're always like, well, we'll do it at that high level and get those, like you say, those short bursts of messages out on where to find more information. But we'll also look for the next opportunity to talk about it. So maybe 2 or 3 months down the line, when can we sort of push, start to push out the message again? I think with on the pension scheme side, that's definitely got better with the advent of master trusts and things, and with platforms and stuff that they've got with e-cards and all that. And again, pushing out information, and depends on the sophistication of it. But, you know, if somebody updates their marital status, it will push something out to them to remind them, or if they hit a certain age, you know, it pushes things out. I think we're getting much better around that push technology, which is why I think with auto enrollment, you know, I think it is that, you know, you capture inertia. That was great, but it's how do you continue that engagement, because that initial spike of inertia is now dissipated.
Yeah,
I just don't think people are interested.
Next, yeah, indeed.
yeah. So thinking about that then with auto enrollment, there's a lot of push in the industry, and a lot of talk in the industry about removing the lower levels. How does that? How obviously as an employer with probably, you know, a lot of part-time staff and a lot of seasonal staff, would you see that as a good thing or a bad thing, removing those lower levels?
So from a moral perspective, absolutely, because as I mentioned earlier, you know, we have got a few, you know, people that might be looking at their other colleagues or heard about auto enrollment and thinking, yeah, great, I'm going to get a pension from the from the company, because it's, you know, we think back to the original things in Worky, which always made me laugh. Big purple monster.
I forgot about Worky.
Worky. But that was about, it was, yeah, it only lasts about 6 months, I think, Worky. But, you know, that's like, if you're the whole broad brush messaging around that was, you know, your employer's got to put you in a pension scheme. Yeah, but obviously in an advert or a social media campaign and stuff, they're not going to start talking about lower, you know, if you earn below X amount and stuff and caveats. But fundamentally, that's the point. So you could have people walking around with that stuck in their brain, but not realizing that they don't earn, or being under, you know, under the age requirements. So it very much is that balance around, from a moral perspective, it absolutely ticks the box that I think auto enrollment was intending to achieve. That you know, given, you know, the changes in the state pension, the raise in the state pension age, you know, that was, you know, a way of trying to drive that pillar 2 retirement or retirement savings. But, you know, I think we'd have to think really carefully on the impact, as you say, of UK PLC, particularly given current environment. I think timing and some sort of, there probably would have to be some, you know, consideration to some sort of phasing. If it just landed overnight, you know, there's a potential, you know, it could, you know, absolutely decimate some companies who are, like, say, reliant on part-time workers or short-term workers. So, like I say, generally, I think, you know, people would definitely think it's a good thing, but being mindful to the fact that there is a monetary impact. So have a proper, good, thought out implementation plan, engagement with the relevant, CBI is a good example around that impact on employers. Because again, it's around that there was always planned to be the uplift in the employer contribution, going back to that Australian point earlier. There's generally acknowledgement that this year, next year, and probably the year after, until we understand really what the new world looks like, it's a big ask. So I think definitely something that, you know, just looking at the auto enrollment regulations and the requirements, generally 10 years on is no bad thing. Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing?
You mentioned, sorry, can I ask a point there? You mentioned the grubby word of money terms there. and I just, if you don't mind, bring it back to a bit of commercials on this. So it's brilliant to hear, you know, you've got multiple products, multiple services. It's not just a pure pension play that you're thinking about for your colleagues. Do all of these components feel affordable to you, or better, value for money at the moment? So there's obviously there's a value for money review on pensions going on. If you think about group risk, and if you think about the group ISA and so forth, do these things feel good value for money today?
I think, as I say, I mentioned master trusts earlier. I think in terms of the governance, sort of lifting some of the governance burden, and I think, you know, they're a completely different beast to what they were when they first started again 10 years ago or so. You know, sort of the investment strategies have evolved, so that's driven better, you know, better pricing, better value for money for members, because it's all about value for money, better outcomes, communications. For me, when I'm looking at that, it's how we can, you know, join that all up, or include that as part of the, as I say, this more holistic journey. So when we've looked at, you know, did a total reward review, where are the gaps, what do we need to fill, what are we doing now and doing well, or what could we do better, or what do we, you know, that all comes, you know, as part of the thought process. And as I say, doing a survey to colleagues to actually understand what it is that, you know, they want. And it was different by, again, as you'd imagine, by different age groups and what they valued more. And therefore you sort of understand where, like, coming back to your point of, well, where's the investment? Where should we be thinking of, you know, if we want to improve, you know, colleague experience? And come back to money point, you know, the thing around sort of just making it a better place to work, and a better place from both a, you know, physical and financial well-being perspective for people to be, and an attractive place to work. Yeah, certainly, that's certainly some of the things, you know, we looked at, i.e. we're not going to spend money in a place where we just think we're just not going to get any, you know, real engagement with it. But, you know, we knew what we already had. We had a, you know, a good benchmarked pension arrangement. We have share save and share buy, and things like that. But also, as I say, I think generally, and this is where people are heading to, is the more as an employee you can be a facilitator to workplace savings. And this is capturing the auto enrollment, because when people have it being paid, deducted out of their salary, it doesn't even hit their bank account, people adjust to that. And it's actually then going back in. So if, you know, if you can engage with people and go, look, it's a minimum £10 a month, you know, don't set the bar too high, minimum £10 a month, do this, you know, you can put it into here, make the messaging simple around it, and it's just engendering that savings culture. Because, as I say, a bit like with auto enrollment, once you're in, most people can't bother to opt out unless there is a real financial affordability issue, or a potential reason for, or a reason why they don't want to be, and that might be coming up to retirement or something. So yeah, I think that there is something around that. And obviously, you know, on the other end of that is, you know, sort of the more high earners who are obviously being impacted by the ever decreasing pension tax allowances, which obviously does make sometimes conversations difficult, and getting engagement from the more senior people who might not find the pension scheme that attractive. But yeah, what have you got in place for them? I'm not saying, you know, lifetime allowance, annual allowance, you know, that comes back to that thing some people say, you know, nice problem to have. But equally, as a good employee, you know, we've got colleagues in all walks of life. You know, we can't just go, oh well, they can't be in the pension scheme because they, you know, they're earning such and such. What can we have for them, you know, to actually, in a tax, you know, in a tax efficient way, have something there available for everybody, really. And so it's just that inclusive culture that we always try and engender. Where we are now, it's, you know, we just want people to be able to, you know, as a good employer, have something where they can put their money, and obviously, you know, there's economies of scale, so you'll always be, or you think so, but you should be able to get better value for money from a group arrangement than you can from going out there on your own.
Absolutely.
Buying power, it's amazing.
Well, exactly. I agree. So you are obviously at the sort of, you know, cutting edge of a lot of this, from, you know, from being a large employer, with a long held background in looking after your employees. You know, you've got a very parentalistic culture historically. So you're sort of in a space that perhaps a lot of other employers would envy, really, from that perspective, because you've obviously got a staff that look after this, and yourself that looks to the future, and you've got a chief exec that really understands this, the importance of this. Thinking of other employers, further down the size order, how I think from where you lead, they will follow. How have you seen, smaller employers adopt things that you as larger employers or more leading employers have led the way on?
I think just having it's what we start sort of coming back full circle to what we started with, really, is sort of, decoupling this thing around just pensions being, the be all and end all. I think more generally, and I'm not even talking about setting up, as I say, access to workplace ISAs and stuff, because actually they don't necessarily come at a cost. Some of these things, are, you can sort of in terms of that, you can price it in different ways. So I think it needs to be an understanding around some of the smaller employers, that some of these things don't have to cost the earth, because even though we are a large employer, we're a retailer, we've had to ride the storm of the last 18 months. So it's not all about having a blank checkbook by any stretch. It's sort of understanding what your colleagues want, I think, is really, really important. Whether it's having if it's a smaller employer, having conversations with them, slightly bigger if you need to do surveys. What is it you're delivering? Where are you spend your money wisely? Because not everyone's, bit small to large, not everyone's got, like I say, buckets of cash to be sloshing around. But spend it wisely and spend it in the places you think it will have the most impact. So from a financial wellbeing perspective, as I say, I think it is also providing that more general support and breaking down those, as I said earlier, the taboos around having those conversations, and just giving people access to somewhere to go. And that can be as simple, and I'd say as cost efficient, as signposting sort of money helper, or just giving people that ability to, and having, somebody on site who's the go-to person that can go, there's this really good website we've got. It doesn't have to, I think the clear messaging is, it doesn't have to cost the earth. And there are some really good, there's some really good technology that sits behind it. So it comes back to that keep it simple thing as well. So if you can have a really neat one-stop shop for your employees to go to, that's brilliant. Supported by, as we talked about earlier, communications and engagement, and that not constant, but that point in time bursts of information to get people to go back and visit it and keep it fresh. And it doesn't have to be over complicated, and it doesn't have to cost the earth.
Yeah,
I think that's really, really key.
I think that's a real lesson for smaller employers, but also I guess the industry as a whole is to make products available to that are sort of wrapped up like that. So I guess for smaller employers, it must be harder for them to spend their their executive time or their HR time or HR budget on thinking about what these new benefits might bring. But if they're packaged up in such a way, you can get the benefit with very little extra cost, if any extra cost, and your employees will get that benefit.
Well, that's the thing. If you've got like a bundled solution or a platform where things can sit on, and as you alluded to there, John, it could be that you're then partnering with other really good people that sort of that do this in this space, that you're not creating I think also that going back over time and past experience, I think we're now moving into the world, there's much more around partnering. So companies are sort of going, right, well, we've got this great idea, but we know that Joe Bloggs over here is absolutely nailing it in this space. So let's do like some partnering on it. Let's, you know, create, like you say, something brilliant rather than us go away and build it. So I think that sort of partnering ethos, but coming back to that one-stop shop, I think it is a really good opportunity, so that, you know, employees can just take almost like off the shelf, this is the hub, and what do you want to bolt onto it? So, you know, we can bolt on this, you know, we can bolt on dashboard when it's available. Do you want to, you know, have something that's a link to your pension provider online? You know, do they do an app? You know, a bit more like a hosting type thing, because like I say, people just want to go one place and know it's all there. And like I say, from an employer and HR perspective, they will be aware of things like we talked about earlier, like EAP, the other more broader wellbeing bits that they might want to put as part of that. Yeah, so I think, you know, if you sort of, in terms of those conversations, if you just went along to an HR person, or if, you know, that's got this as part of their job, and say, right, we've got this hub, to which you can add on all these bits, pick a mix. What do you want? Where does it sit with your colleagues? Have you thought about engaging with one of them about what they want? That's your first point. This is what you can do. Then what can you do to deliver it? And then it comes with, what's the comms plan? That should be as simple. And I'm you know, massively oversimplifying it, but that's what it is.
I agree with you. You know, having that sort of almost sweet shop approach around for an employer, for being able to go through that. Well, I can have this, and it's not going to cost me any more, but it will give my employees benefit. It would be a really strong and compelling thing.
Yeah, really, really compelling. And as I say, realistically, you know, it's not just about financial spend, it's time spend as well. So realistically, you know, again, we're fortunate. We've got, you know, a really strong centre of excellence reward team where, you know, this is our bread and butter. We've got lots of experience. But if it's, you know, just part of your job, but, you know, a really busy HR manager, you don't necessarily, you know, you won't have the time, the money, or the, you know, the wherewithal to want to go around, you know, doing RFPs to different benefit providers and all of that, because you just won't, and then it won't happen. So I'd say make it simple, make it that like you say, that sweet shop pick a mix approach, but fundamentally looking at the principles. You know, bit of navel gazing. Why are you doing this, and who you're doing it for?
Yeah, and I think that comes down to the fact is that something you said earlier about employees being very different over where they are in their lives, what they want, and with your different employers that you've been with in the past, is you have different demographics. So, you know, you were talking about your oil workers, and then you're talking about you know, retail workers, and they have different needs, and it's I guess it's understanding those and delivering to that.
But you know, it comes down to, when I was thinking about it, having worked in different, as you say, John, with different completely and utterly different sectors over the years, with different wants and needs, I think base principles is that people will always, particularly as an employer, and as I say, good responsible employer, will generally will look to their employer for help if they're employed. And obviously, you know, people that are self-employed, that's a whole other area to explore around what can we do to sort of to help that and make it simple and capture some of this, you know, balance of technology and push and point in time need. But people will look to their employer, and that's regardless, you know, that goes from the top to the bottom, because they will always look to what they see as, you know, I need to go somewhere where I can get subject matter you know, expertise. So yeah, I think, and if you've got somewhere that you can go to, as I say, that's the technology solution that's then overlaid with this comms and engagement piece, then you've got it there, because they'll know where to go, and they've got the support they need. And it evolves, doesn't it? Because the world evolves. So you take things, put things on and add it on. So that's the thing. I think the other, we talked about it earlier, but it's not being static, not going, okay, that's what I've done, that, tick that box.
Yeah.
It's ongoing, but it's not I think what a provider's approach would need to be, you know, particularly looking at the SMEs, is pushing some of this out and go, look at this great new thing we want to put on there. And it's like, yeah, great, okay, we'll do that then. And yeah, that'll work for ours. You know, we've got something new and exciting we want to share. So yeah, it's just continued evolution massively. I think some really good opportunities out there.
Yeah, I really think so. I think that, you know, the opportunities in this space are only really limited by imagination and and you know, desire. Really, I think there's so much potential to do really well with employee savings. I think auto enrollment has sort of unlocked that. So I mentioned earlier there were two pieces of legislation that that are coming forth. The other one is collective DC, which I think, you know, is clearly currently aimed at Royal Mail pension scheme, but like potentially for other large employers as well. What's your current take on that, based on the information at the moment? Do you think that's something that's viable? Is it interesting to larger employers?
For me, I think, so sort of my understanding of it as it stands, so it's like multi-employer type arrangement. It's a bit similar to the Dutch model, isn't it? So collective DC has been around there for a long time. But I'm not quite sure. I mean, I think if you're looking at the general push from the pensions regulator around the additional governance around DC and the focus of, you know, when we say smaller schemes, but it's looking up to like 5 billion. So that's going to capture, at the moment, you know, most DC schemes. So I think potentially for those own trust schemes that are still out there, that could be another solution, potential solution or a consideration versus master trust, if they want to retain some element of governance control around it. I think for us, we obviously one of the earliest adopters. Well, we were L&G's first client on master trust. I think we're so far down that line now that we wouldn't, I don't think, reverse back out of that now. So, but it's an interesting one. As I say, the timing of it is not a bad thing in the context of the regulator's guidance, and I think, you know, a lot of own trust schemes will look at the additional governance, therefore the additional time commitment, the additional spend, and we'll be looking at different solutions. So collective DC certainly could be something that they might want to do versus, like I say, completely handing it off to a master trust.
I think that's probably a fair assumption. I think, you know, to me, it sort of potentially arrived a bit late.
Yeah, that's what I say, because we're so far down the line, there's no way we'd reverse out of it. But if you're an own trust scheme, having that debate with you know, as a sponsor with your trustees, for example, that's another thing to include in the conversation. But yeah, far too late for the larger schemes that have already, some of the larger schemes that have already moved into the master trust space. I think the appetite to move back out will be limited.
Yeah. So something you touched on there was the consolidation of schemes and looking at that consolidation piece. So we spoke a little bit about small pots and members and their dashboards, but from a consolidation of schemes perspective, we're seeing the regulator, who clearly a little bit upset about the number of smaller schemes, which some of them are quite big for smaller schemes. What's your approach on that? Do you think that will lead to good outcomes as a whole, or do you have some reservations?
I do work well. The market had already constricted already, so there is, you know, and I think with additional governance, that will constrict particularly the master trust market even further. So I do have some concerns, like I say, because there's only one direction of travel, right? You know, it's going to be quite unusual for a DC owned trust at a standalone, and what's the one that's not tagged on to a DB scheme, so you've got that joined up governance piece, to actually go, you know, why am I going to continue operating it with all these additional requirements? So there could be a massive capacity crunch in terms for the providers, you know, resourcing it. And I know that they, you know, so it's almost accelerating their plans for how they were going to grow their client base, but with this additional piece of legislation or regulations coming in, that will certainly hasten the pace. So there is a worry about the general constriction of the market and the capacity for the market to absorb that. And I think it will actually lead to some interesting outcomes, because the lead players will become much more choosy. So then what happens to the smaller own trust clients?
Yeah.
What happens in that space?
I think there's a few worries for, you know, that I see is you know, those smaller, those bigger players becoming choosy over what they take and what they don't. I also think you are losing an element of choice. You're losing an element of
market competition. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, you know, small doesn't always mean bad. I've seen some very well run small schemes in my time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very poorly run large schemes. So it doesn't always go like that. So it'll be interesting. I do think, you know, some more consolidation is good, because, you know, they just haven't got the scale. But
again, if we look to the Aussie market, and we shouldn't always, because it's a different, sorry, I'm going to say the pension word, it's a different pension system. But if you look at how that pans out in terms of the consolidation there, and the fact that the supers, you know, became fit for different purposes, different types of employee scales.
Yeah.
One thing, you know, one thing you do see there as a result is sort of value for money to the member.
Yeah.
Very visible. It's in your face, glowing all the time. You know, who's good, who's bad, league tables. So maybe actually, perversely, you get better choice once you get there. But it feels a shame, doesn't it, to lose some small scheme options, some innovators and things.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So the own trust schemes, let's say, if the main sort of master trust providers become, let's say, quite picky about who they're going to take, and, you know, let's be honest, an implementation or transition of a 50 million assets under management scheme is still requires the same amount of rigor and project management and as, you know, 2 billion. So, you know, they can afford to be choosy in that respect. But yeah, I think with superannuation funds, like you say, it is much more like what we sort of say, like almost like the old annuity tables of like, you've got £1,000 and that will buy you that pension. We don't have that anywhere near that level of transparency at the moment because of the individual pricing that master trust providers will give to each of their participating employers. And that'd be great. I'd be massively up for that, because like I say, I think that drives it. You know, I always work on the fact if I can see it visually in front of me, I know what I'm buying, and I can get that. That's I'm making an informed decision. You know, and it does make it difficult when people are sort of asking around about transferring around pots. It's like, well, you've got to look at the charges on that one versus that one, and they're like, well, they're both with such and such. It's like, well, you know, but they will have completely different charges even if you're in the same fund, and that's when it makes it.
They're both
tricky.
Apples, but that's a red one and that's a green one, and that's a cooking apple. You know,
yeah, that's a crab apple.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So it does make it really difficult. But yeah, I do wonder if, like you say, the collective DC is coming off the back of a recognition of the fact that some of the smaller own trusts might want to do some sort of multi-employer arrangement. Be interesting to see if that's where it ends up.
Picking up on the point of the Australian league tables, etc. So very recently, sort of relatively hot off the press, the poor performers, so the poor performing Australian super funds have been given a 28-day notice period as of, I think it was yesterday, to write to all their members and tell them they may be better off to transfer elsewhere.
Wow.
because their performance is low compared to everywhere else. So I think that's a real, that was harsh but fair potentially, but example of how the market could evolve over time with that transparency piece. And reading some of the responses is quite interesting on that as well. And it comes down to what we were just discussing about the outcomes of some particular providers or employers is different to others, and trying to compare and contrast. So it's there's certainly a few people, crying foul, as you'd expect, but it's a very difficult thing to measure. So in the UK market, that would be really interesting from a transparency perspective.
Yeah, great. I think anything
kind of space.
Anything that drives transparency can only be a good thing, because it just, like you say, informs choice. You know what you're getting for your money. But we're just not there yet, because it comes down to this individual pricing point. So, if the master trust market ever did evolve to the point where, this is what you're getting, this is what you're buying, who's to say? Because I say it's evolved so much in the first 9 years, and obviously the supers have been around a lot longer. So it'd be really good to get to that point. Maybe that's where, with the consolidation, that's where we're heading, I think, potentially.
I think there's some interestingly on that, is in one of the recent consultation papers that came out from the pensions minister, was suggesting that members maybe, what would the impact be of members choosing their own provider rather than that coming from the employer, which I think would really blow apart our current model.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
And so that would be, I can kind of see the importance of choice, but equally, all those good things that we've been talking about today it would be made harder through adopting that model.
Well, it's an interesting one, though, because we talked about the sort of the pillar 1, pillar 2, pillar 3 earlier. So in other countries, that's not unusual. So you have the pillar 2 employer provision, which is almost like your core, and then you'll have your pillar 3 supplementary, which again, if you had, right, as a employer, that complies with auto enrollment, but actually then you've got something that you're promoting in terms of supplementary saving, and whether that's through tax incentives or whether it's through bundled centralized schemes. So like you say, something like the super sort of 5 providers that you choose from, that could, if you think about it in terms of that model, that could be the way forward. And actually that would then mean you don't necessarily have to do too much with auto enrollment just now, because from an affordability perspective, but to engender that savings culture, that could be really interesting. But again, keeping it simple, keeping it to like maximum 5, like say clear, transparent charges, make it simple, straight through processing, all of that good stuff. I think it's some sort of pillar 3 supplementary, which we used to have with AVCs, by the way, or back in the day, freestanding AVCs.
Yeah.
Oh, good old FSAVCs. They were always good fun. Benefit statement.
Pre-A-Day FSAVCs. But again, that's 15 years ago, but that was the norm. People did have the choice outside of their, their sponsors scheme to go and do a top up. That doesn't happen now, really.
No, it's an interesting point. I'd completely forgot about FSAVC. But that was the entire objective, wasn't it? To be able to allow some choice.
Yeah.
Which we've lost actually, which is it's pretty cool.
Great.
John,
Oh.
anything you wanted to do? Otherwise, we'll go on to our wizardy wand question.
Yes. Shall I close with the traditional question?
Why not?
Oh, go on.
Right. As is tradition, Nicola, we like to grant you the Bravura magic wand. And it enables you to make one wish of something that you'd like to fix in the UK. I'm going to say pensions market, but think long-term savings market. What would you do with that wand today?
I would just make it so much more simple. We write again, going back, so pension simplification. Great. We're even more complex than we were 15 years ago. And the more complicated you make it for people, the less interested they are in it, as we talked about earlier. So I'd be massive, I'd breathe a huge sigh of relief. If we could just if people can understand it, they become interested in it. You get that automatic engagement. It's not simple. People don't understand it. I think I can't remember where I was, but one of the HR managers used to work with called pensions, the dark arts.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be the dark arts. I mean, it's great for me from an employment perspective because everyone thinks it's really complex, and I don't want it to be like that. So if by the time I finish my career in a few years' time, if we could get to the point, and that superannuation point is a fabulous one, and having that, and as John then mentioned about some sort of simple pillar 3, but let's just tidy up what we've got and just make it really, really simple. That would be my wish, my magic wand wish.
Amen to that.
Here, here.
Right.
Excellent.
Smashing. Thanks,
So
guys.
thank you very much, Nicola. It's been really, really interesting, and I've really enjoyed your international views on things as well. Your international studies background for pensions has shone through in a few areas, which have been really fascinating as well.
No, very welcome. And my HR hat and everything else my many hats that I have at the moment now. So.
Yes, yeah, it's been absolutely fascinating. It's been really enjoyable.
I've really enjoyed it, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.